In this video, I'm going to tell you why I still put all my clients on low carb diets despite the biggest ever study saying that it's no better than any other diet. And no, it's not because I think the science is wrong, but something isn't right. You see, I lost 30 kilograms in just over 6 months back in 2016, and I've kept it off ever since. And my clients regularly lose even more than that. And yet, this study said that people overall, over the longer term, lose between 1 and 11 kilograms. So I have to ask, why this huge difference between what I'm seeing and what the science is saying? Well, in this video, I'm going to explain why those studies are only looking at half the picture. And actually, the other half of the picture is every bit as important for your long-term success. But in order to understand this, you need to understand why I think low carb is great in the first place. So, for pretty much 10 years now, I've been obsessed with what makes people actually successful on weight loss journeys and how they actually keep it off. Because it's something that eluded me for nearly 35 years, and frankly, it put me in a very embarrassing position. You see, I was an obese doctor. That all changed in 2016 when I went on a very strict low carbohydrate diet and got to a normal weight for the first time in my adult life. And this is after having failed so many times using that classic calorie restricted, eat less, move more approach. And so yeah, I was sold. So imagine my surprise in 2022 when this major review comes out showing that whilst low carbohydrate diets are marginally better for weight loss in the short term, over the longer term, like a year or more, things just seem to even out. And the thing is, this wasn't just any study. This was something called a Cochrane review. And Cochrane reviews are basically seen as the very, very highest level of evidence in medicine. So a pretty important study. Yeah, I'm seeing people losing half their body weight and keeping it off for far longer than that study ever looked at. So yeah, it just wasn't really tallying with either my personal or my medical experience. And so yeah, you could say you're biased, you're cherry picking cases, and yeah, sure, to do that wouldn't make for very good science. But this isn't a scientific study, it's a YouTube video. And surely another really useful question to ask is, well, what are those people doing who get incredible results, and how can I do what they're doing? And actually, I think this tells you a lot about what those big diet studies don't actually look at. But yeah, this wasn't just a case of, well, this diet worked for me, so it must be the right one. You see, the whole low carbohydrate approach just made so much more sense to me. So let me just explain what I mean, and do stick with me here because this is very important. So the whole idea behind restricting calories is extremely simple, right? Just eat fewer calories, do more exercise, and you'll lose weight. And then all you got to do is keep going and all your weight loss dreams will come true. Except it doesn't always work like that, does it? Didn't work for me, pretty much doesn't work for anybody I've ever talked to. And so yeah, actually we've known for a long time why this approach fails. You see, our bodies know that they're being restricted and respond in two key ways. Number one, they slow our metabolic rate down, so you feel tired. You don't have the energy to move more. And then we become hungrier, so eating less becomes extremely difficult. And these are hardwired biological systems that kept our ancestors alive during periods of food scarcity for millennia. And they're way stronger than any willpower. So yeah, the vast majority who try calorie restriction end up failing. That's well known, and yeah, you've probably experienced it. And so yeah, the results of that big study are basically what I'd expect for a calorie restricted diet. 1 to 11 kilograms, pretty unimpressive after a year. But yeah, in 2016, I learned a better way. A way more in tune with my understanding of the human body. So instead of thinking about energy balance in calories, I started thinking about hormones. And yeah, we all have hormones, you've heard of them: adrenaline, cortisol, testosterone, estrogen, to just name a few. But yeah, all a hormone is a chemical messenger that goes from one part of the body to another part of the body to signal something. And several hormones are involved in weight management, but actually I want to talk about arguably the most important one: insulin. Yep, you've heard of insulin. It's the stuff we give to diabetics to control blood glucose. And when we're not injecting it, the pancreas produces it in response to elevated blood glucose levels. And it spreads through the bloodstream, having lots of different actions all over the body. But importantly, it acts on our fat cells. And one key job of a fat cell is making fat from glucose and then storing it. And so insulin is the signal to that fat cell to take up glucose, to turn it into fat, and to store it. And so yeah, we can think of insulin as a fat storage hormone. More insulin swimming around the body, more fat gets stored. And it's the carbohydrates that we consume, the sugars, and also the stuff that breaks down to sugar, like bread, rice, pasta, potatoes. They all shoot blood glucose up, causing more insulin to be released. And so it follows quite logically. Just reduce the amount of these that you're consuming in your diet, then insulin levels will drop, you stop storing fat, and actually start to be able to use that stored fat for energy. And that's exactly what happened when I lost all that weight back in 2016, and I've seen it happen many times since. Now, this is also made even more important because many overweight people have another issue. It's called insulin resistance. Basically, the body has become resistant to the effects of insulin, so that pancreas has to produce more and more insulin to have the same effect on the body. And so in somebody who's insulin resistant, there's just way more insulin swimming around their body, keeping their body in fat storage mode. One way to think about this is basically the body has become intolerant to carbohydrates. And actually, it's these people who I think low carbohydrate diets are the most important for. And so yeah, you might be wondering, hang on a second, is that something that I've got going on? Can I get a blood test? Unfortunately, it's not that straightforward. And I think this is why many doctors just miss it. But yeah, if you're curious as to whether insulin resistant is something you need to be worried about, I made a free guide for you. Basically, you have to go full detective and actually just work it out for yourself. That's the best way. And so yeah, I've made a guide to show you how to do that. Links in the description down below. Probably takes 5 or 10 minutes and you'll know if this is something that you need to be thinking about. Anyway, so it seems logical that a low carb diet should work best for those with insulin resistance. So yeah, that was my experience and that was the experience of many of my clients. But that just wasn't what this major study was showing. So what do? Do I just throw my hands up and admit I was wrong? Well, no, I'm actually still a believer in low carbohydrate diets and ketogenic diets. So am I just stubborn? One of those doctors who can't respond to emerging evidence? Am I stuck in my ways? Well, actually, I think there's a huge piece of the puzzle that the Cochrane study just doesn't capture. You see, this study looks at things like food, carb consumption, weight, blood markers, and then looks at them over time and basically says which one's better. Everything else is kept the same by design. That's how these studies have to work. But what it doesn't look at is why people who don't get results actually fail. And yeah, that's what I've been obsessed with for a long time. And I know what you might be thinking. Oh great, here's another doctor who thinks he knows better than the research. But actually hear me out, because there is a very big difference between low carb diets and non-low carb diets for weight loss. You see, these different diet approaches fail for both the same reasons and also very different reasons. And I've already explained why calorie-restricted diets fail. They're just not biologically compatible with long-term success because of millions of years of evolution. But beyond that, there are many reasons why people fail. But actually, before we start looking at why people fail, why don't we look at why people actually start? Because that's really, really important. It deals with motivation. You see, there's a big difference between I want to look good in a bathing suit and my friend had his foot amputated from diabetes. He nearly died in surgery, and I know that if I don't change, I'm going to end up just like him. And some of you know that a ketogenic diet can treat epilepsy. And so yeah, there's a strong motivation. If I stop this diet, I'll have a seizure. And a former client of mine who started a ketogenic diet for weight loss, but actually discovered that it kept his rare blood cancer in remission. Surely that's got to be a good reason to stay on the plan, right? The science shows that those who deeply understand the health risks that go along with weight issues are far more likely to stick with it. And you might think that motivation is fixed, that it can't be changed. You want what you want, right? Well, actually, most clients come to me wanting to lose weight, but quite a few actually have prediabetes, but no one's ever really explained what that means. And so I explain it to them, and I explain that the studies show that people with prediabetes are actually already at increased risk of mortality. That means they're at increased risk of dying young because they have this. Simply explaining that changes the game no end. And then we talk about progressing to type 2 diabetes, which, again, they don't really understand. They've heard of it, but don't really understand why it's a problem. You see, a good coach will reframe this, helping people move from a fairly low motivation state to a fairly high motivation state. And you might think that's mean. I'm just scaring people, but actually, often it's helping them get their head out the sand. But those studies, motivation doesn't even come into it when they're recruiting for weight loss studies. It's just, are you above a certain weight? Do you want to do a weight loss study? And then there's what happens when people get started. Well, what are the real reasons that people actually quit? Because this is where it gets really interesting. Time is obviously a massive one. Oh, I'm just too busy for this. And that goes hand in hand with stress. And yeah, many of my clients have stressful existences, and they manage those stressful existences through food and through alcohol. Then there's family situations, from the unsupportive spouse bringing home cakes and ordering takeaways, to the stress that comes about worrying about elderly relatives. And then there's depression and anxiety, which are huge reasons that people drop off diets. Except depression and anxiety are far more common in people with weight issues. So that needs addressing too. And side effects are a big one. Low carb diets often cause headaches, fatigue, what we call keto flu. All very normal, all easily managed, but if it's not explained properly, then people will drop off. They think something's wrong and their body just actually doesn't suit this way of eating. And so the problem is that many of the studies, they're not even going to mention this stuff because actually that would be seen as giving an unfair supportive advantage to one group over the other. And then there's the practical stuff. Sticking to it around work, business dinners, social occasions. Then there's getting it wrong initially. Slow initial results kill people's motivation. People get demotivated during plateaus. Again, all completely normal. And then there's just the logistics of handling it all. The affordability of food, the perceived complexity. And actually what I think is the biggest of all, and I know this might sound controversial, but pretty much everyone who's become significantly overweight, I think has some degree of addictive relationship with food. Now, traditional medicine doesn't even acknowledge that you can get addicted to food, so it's not really dealt with properly in the scientific literature. And also, many of my clients have undiagnosed ADHD, the impulsivity, dopamine-seeking behavior through foods, inability to stick to plans. It all makes sense when you understand the neurodiversity aspect. And all this stuff matters and is absolutely key to success. People need support. You can't randomize people to a diet and then just tell them to get on with it, expecting great results. We're just way more complicated than that. And so, yeah, I think the calorie-restricted approach is biologically doomed to failure before any of that's ever encountered. And yeah, I believe the low-carb approach is biologically superior. But it just doesn't show up in these studies. You see, both low-carb and calorie-restricted diets fail in these studies compared to what's possible. 11 kilograms at the high end is just poor. But what these studies fail to kind of pull out is that they fail for different reasons. You see, blanket calorie restriction fails because it's just not compatible with human existence. We've spent millennia developing compensatory systems to survive. Your body thinks it's in famine and it responds accordingly. Slowed metabolism, increased hunger, reduced energy expenditure. Calorie restriction is just destined to fail for the vast majority. But low-carb diets, they don't have that biological restriction on them. They fail because we routinely fail to address everything else. And so, yeah, actually, the results of that study didn't really surprise me. Well, yeah, low carbohydrate diets do really well in the first few months, but then things drop back off because people aren't getting the support that they need. Well, that didn't really come as a surprise to me. You see, this stuff just isn't easy. And in my practice, when we address all these barriers, teach people how to do it properly, explain to them what's going to happen to them and support them through all of that other stuff, well, yeah, they lose 30, 40, 50 plus kilograms. and they keep it off. And they're comparing diets in a vacuum, measuring biological outcomes in supposedly perfect conditions, but actually, life isn't a randomized controlled trial. Sometimes, often, it's far more complicated than that. There's one study that actually, I think, showed the power of getting this right. There's one trial that showed 85% adherence at 2 years. Like 85%, that is just unheard of in diet studies. So how did they do it? Well, what they didn't do was hand people a diet sheet and say, good luck. They actually created an entire ecosystem. The workplace cafeteria labelled food with colours showing what each diet group could eat. Red meant avoid, amber meant occasionally, and green for go. They provided group support sessions, external accountability, like having a boss expecting results. And this made the healthy choices the easy choices. And that's the difference. This is why some people lose 30, 40, 50 kilograms, whilst that study showed maximum of 11. And yeah, the diet does work differently. But actually, it's that some people stumble into or deliberately create this support structure, whilst most don't. Studies aren't measuring this. They're weighing people, they're taking blood tests, but they're not measuring whether somebody's spouse is being supportive to them or whether their workplace and work life even makes this possible. So yeah, if you want some help putting all that other stuff in place, then check out the link in the description down below where you can find out how you can work with me. Otherwise, I strongly suggest that you have a look at this video that is on the screen right now. Thank you for watching.